Hey guys, this is Eckhart's Ladder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video. Today's content is sponsored by, well, me. I've got a few things going on I want to briefly share. First of all, I started playing the Old Republic for the first time ever. I know it's surprising, but I never really played an MMO before. I've been streaming it over on my second channel, X2, but if there's a lot of interest in the comments, maybe I'll do a brief hour here or so before moving to the second channel tonight, assuming that I do stream. Otherwise, I also just put out a new podcast episode of iJedi, which contains a lot of the information that we'll be covering in today's video. Link to that down in the description. So with that said, let's talk about Tuta Minis, which in the title I called the most powerful and rare Jedi power ever. And you know what? I stand by that. There are rarer powers in the galaxy. I think Sidious, for example, used some, but I think this is the most powerful of the truly light side abilities. And I've got an interesting quote from iJedi to back that up, but we'll get to that later. First, let's give a bit of background. So iJedi covers the story of an individual known as Corran Horn, who is a fan favorite Legends character. Corran, who of course is also well known for being a member of Rogue Squadron, discovers that he has a Jedi lineage. Basically, his grandfather and his father both trained in the way of the Jedi arts, but because of Order 66 and the Great Purge, they were forced to go into hiding. In fact, Corran's biological grandfather, Neja Halcyon, was actually killed at the end of the Clone Wars, and Neja's best friend Rostic Horn actually adopted Corran's father and passed him off as his biological child. Star Wars Legends, especially before the prequels, really focused on Jedi powers being passed, if not primarily, at least largely through lineage. Of course, we do see some of that with like the Skywalker family, but it was much more prominent in Legends, and it seems like if someone who's Force sensitive has a child, they're basically guaranteed to be Force sensitive themselves. Not only that, but there are peculiarities of their Force sensitivity which can actually be passed on to their children, and that is the case with Corran Horn. Male members of the Halcyon family, including Corran Horn, his father, his grandfather Neja Halcyon, and even his son Vaylin Horn, have a very difficult time using telekinetic abilities. So despite the fact that Corran Horn became one of the most powerful Jedi in Luke's new Jedi Order, he would still have a very difficult time even levitating a rock, at least under normal circumstances. As he developed his Jedi training, he was able to gain some basic abilities, but for example, just to compare, other Jedi of his class could easily levitate pebbles, for example, while Corran just has a complete mental block, and even his grandfather Neja couldn't force pull his lightsaber to him in a life or death moment. However, in place of telekinetics, the Halcyon family had some very unique gifts. One of these was a very advanced form of Force suggestion. He could plant an image in front of somebody and make them believe it. He could even do this on a very large scale, and even did so accidentally to the entire first class of Luke's Praxium, including Luke himself. However, I think the more interesting Halcyon ability is energy absorption, which has sometimes been called Tuta Minis. Now, energy absorption is technically something that any Jedi can do, and when you see, for example, at least in Star Wars Legends, Vader absorbing that blaster bolt from Han on Cloud City, that is what he's doing. We also see something similar in the Old Republic, with Satele Shan basically neutralizing a lightsaber. However, what is unique about the Halcyon family is just how good they were at this ability, and what they could do with the stored energy, and that's really the main thing here. Although Corran Horn, and I know I keep talking about Corran when it really applies to all the Halcyon family, couldn't use telekinesis regularly, if he were to do something like absorb a blaster bolt, or even absorb the heat from boiling water, then he could, in brief spurts, use extreme telekinetic abilities. This is kind of interesting because it's basically the ultimate defensive move. You could, for example, put up a total force shield to protect yourself from an explosion, and not only does that protect you, but because you have mastered this unique ability, you can now redirect the energy back at your attacker, or in some other helpful way. Yoda does what I would call a very basic version of this in Revenge of the Sith. When Sidious is shocking him, he manages to contain the power, but not truly reroute it or even amplify it. It's impressive that Yoda was able to imply even the basic energy defense itself, especially when it's Sidious and massive amounts of power. However, even Yoda is not able to truly use a counterattack like the Halcyon family, or the few others who were gifted with this extraordinarily rare skill. To me, it's sort of the difference between simply reflecting or blocking the shot, rather than making the energy your own and using it for your own purposes. I'll get to an example of that in just a second, but there is a risk of that as well. Luke speculates that if Corran absorbed power like this and didn't release it, that he ran the risk of literally exploding. So I want to get to one of the most dramatic examples of Tuta Minis, which appears in iJedi, and shows the pure destructive potential of this ability. So this comes as Corran's grandfather, Neja Halcyon, is dueling a group of Dark Jedi on the planet Susafi. Unfortunately, partially because of his lack of telekinetic abilities, the Dark Jedi, Nikos Tyrus, is able to inflict a mortal blow on Halcyon with his lightsaber. Here's what happens next. As a note, this is written from Halcyon's perspective. I concentrated and employed the greatest Halcyon gift against my enemy. I sucked the energy out of the Anzadi's lightsaber and forced myself to smile as I did so. I tasted blood, but the fact elicited no panic. It was inconsequential. More telling was the look of surprise on Tyrus's face as his blue blade flickered once, then twice, then went out. I drained it of every last jewel and let him read in my eyes that he should suddenly be very afraid. With the energy I pulled in, I plucked him from the ground in a giant invisible fist. He screamed, I think. At least his mouth worked as if he was screaming. I made the fist convulse once, and I felt no resistance as his bones shattered. I let him hang limp in the air for a moment, then hurled him back through the tents to slam against the dome in a support. I felt a jolt through the force and saw a blue flash of light, but by then, my energy reserves had faded. So basically, after being mortally injured, Halcyon is able to absorb the damage of Tyrus's lightsaber and uses it to perform a massive attack. He basically grabs his enemy in the air and just crushes him at will. An enemy powerful enough, by the way, to have beaten him in a straight fight. Later, we get the perspective from one of the other Jedi at the battle, and we get the following. The Azure blade fixed him to the ground, sputtered and died, and in an instant I knew what he had done, how he had employed the rarest of all Jedi gifts, and what a terrible price he had paid for it. Tyrus rose in the air, then convulsed, and seemed to explode. So it's a very rare Jedi gift, and of course, very, very powerful. What's more, given the fact that it focuses entirely on defense and not attacking unless otherwise attacked, it pretty much also is the perfect weapon for a Jedi. It almost prevents aggressive action, although I do think you have to use it with some level of caution. Uniquely though, you don't have to use it just for physical attacks. On one occasion, Corran uses it to project a message basically across an entire city. The ability is also far rarer, at least to the extent of the Halcyon line, than something like battle meditation, or really any other Jedi skill that I can think of, and it also seems like you need to have a natural gift for it, at least to use the ability with full effectiveness. That, however, is just my opinion. What do you think of this ability? Am I overselling it? Is there a rare or more destructive Jedi power? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments. Before we leave though, I will take a hashtag AskGek question. So today's question comes from Ethan, who asks, what if the outbound flight had succeeded? And that's an interesting question. For those who don't know, the outbound flight was basically a Jedi project led by Master Joruus C'baoth to exit the Star Wars galaxy and perhaps find space to colonize outside of it. Unfortunately, it was really destined to never work out. What ended up happening is that Sidious convinces Thrawn to destroy it, and he does. Thrawn was not aligned with the Empire at the point, so the way Sidious is able to convince him is that letting the outbound flight pass through the galaxy risks aggravating the Yuuzhan Vong, who are basically preparing for their invasion, and I do think that's possible. The outbound flight would have been destroyed most likely, and the galaxy might have been invaded earlier on. More than that though, even before the project left the galaxy, we can see that several key members were starting to break down, most notably Joruus C'baoth. C'baoth was basically turning to the dark side before even leaving the galaxy, and he was so self-destructive that I don't know if it's likely that he could have made it very far, especially with all the Jedi on board. There is the possibility that yeah, he colonizes some planet outside the galaxy and there's just a planet of dark Jedi running around, but I just think the whole destruction option is much more likely. Thank you for the great question, Ethan. If you guys have any opinions on it, make sure to leave it down below, and if there's a question you'd like me to briefly answer at the end of a future video, leave it in the comments with the hashtag AskGek. Anyway guys, that's it from me. Have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.